Hey guys, so today I want to talk about something that's quite relevant in current pop culture, specifically very, very niche for the UK audience. And that is Georgia Steele on Love Island. So if you haven't been watching it, I will give you a brief synopsis of what you've missed. It's been interesting. Sorry, there's some undercover police outside my house. I'm parked outside. It looks like he's okay. Sorry, I'm getting really sidetracked. I'm just really nosy. There have been police on our road a lot recently. The other day, we got a knock at the door and it was 2 police officers asking for, apparently some car got broken into or something. I promise I don't live in that bad of an area in uni, but I'm really intrigued. I think he's gone now anyway. But yeah, so for anyone that hasn't been watching Love Island, basically, Georgia Steele, who's one of the contestants on it, has kind of been outed in the past 2 or 3 episodes for just being a little bit of a gaslighter, a little bit manipulative, kind of telling people one thing and then telling another person another thing, but trying to make all her stories line up. And then it's sort of come out on last night's episode, what she's been doing, because it was broadcast to everyone. They show you clips of what's been said in certain conversations, because she'll tell someone one story and then she'll tell another person a version of the same story, but twist it just so it will work in her favor. And then if someone else is like, well, you told me this, she's like, well, that's not what I meant, you've got the wrong end of the stick. So an example I'll give you, I'm not going to go fully into it because, if you haven't seen it, the likelihood of you wanting to, has he got a gun? The policeman's back. Okay, no, it's not a gun, it was his jacket. This is the worst form of stimulus for me to have while filming a podcast, because you will be getting live updates throughout this podcast as to what the situation is. Hopefully something occurs. But yeah, anyway. So an example of a situation that occurred was that the other day, I was there, she said to Toby, for anyone that doesn't know, Toby coupled up with her, shock turn of events, left Arabella stood there on her own. I don't really like Arabella that much, but I appreciate how she's handled this situation. A police car, a riot van has just pulled up behind me. Something's going down on my road. Another live update. Apologies, because this is very, very all up in the air. But yeah, so she basically, this is Georgia, said to Toby in some kind of conversation, I'll always care for you, whatever, when we're married with 2 kids, whatever. And then that was played, the clip was played, and Arabella was like, right, look, you told me you had no form of conversation that led him to choose you. You acted like it was completely, unexpected. And then this clip's come out where you're very much basically saying the door's open, here's a green light. And she's saying, when you say to someone, when we're married with 2 kids, and then Georgia goes, no, what I meant was, when I'm married with 2 kids, I won't care about you. I'm not going to entertain that narrative if you think that. That's crazy. You're crazy for thinking that. And it's just nuts to me how honestly smart she is with these manipulations. She's very, very quick with it. And don't get me wrong, because I was a huge fan of her in her first season. I really liked her character. And at the start of the second season, I thought she'd, grown up a lot. And I think this is just the thing, is that I find it really hard, unless it's put right in front of my face, to acknowledge manipulation or deceit until, she starts telling one person one thing and another person another thing. And I'm like, hold on, something's not right here, And this is by no means a dig at her. It's just an interesting case study in a analysing behaviour type of sense. So anyway, she's been called out for being, this gaslighter, manipulator, liar. And it just got me thinking, because it was really interesting seeing how all of the different cast members dealt with this situation, because there was a lot of different approaches from a lot of different people. And it got me thinking, how do you deal with a person like that and a situation like that in the right way? Because I feel like over the past, usually for me, each year has like a theme. So I would say 2022 was, for me, the year of learning how to deal with my own emotions. And then I would say 2023 was learning how to deal with other people's. And throughout that process, I obviously had to face a lot of uncomfortable situations, because when you're working on dealing with emotions, that obviously they're not always going to be good emotions. So I think it was important that I focused on my own emotions first, because I think if I'd gone into other people's emotions without any understanding of how to process my own, that's not going to work, because that would just be projection central. But I feel like over the past 2 years, maybe, I've learned a lot about how to understand how to deal with those types of events and those types of difficult, tricky situations, specifically when gaslighting or manipulation is involved. I'm actually doing my dissertation on manipulation, and like at what point does persuasion become manipulation, and like, because I really struggle to understand those social cues, and I think for me it's just something that I really am interested in. Like, how does that work? Like, where does that come from? And I think in social situations, quite a lot of the times we manipulate without even realizing we're doing it. Like, one thing that I noticed with this Georgia Steele situation is that she could come to absolutely no awareness or no understanding that this is what she was doing. She couldn't say, like, at one point Callum was like, just admit that you've lied. We'll all have a more respect for you if you can just admit. And she was like, but I haven't lied, that's how I felt in the moment, but I didn't do that. And I think that's a really hard thing, is like with manipulation, because there's definitely been times where, you know, people have said to me, like, you're being manipulative, and I'm like, no, I'm not. And, you know, looking back, I definitely was. And I think it's really hard in the moment to acknowledge your own bad behaviour. And especially when we lose our head. And this is why I was saying about how quite often, that's not the right word. When you're trying to work on your own behaviour, it's important to acknowledge your triggers and what makes you tick and the things that annoy you, because when other people push those buttons, it's not necessarily a reflection of them, it's more a reflection of you. As harsh as that may sound, and I'm not saying that in the sense that other people can't be nasty, because they can, but I think that's a really hard discussion to have, like individually, one-on-one, is at what point is someone being mean, and at what point are they just doing something that pushes your buttons and that's not their fault? Where is that line? And I think that's a really interesting thing to look into, because, you know, I had a chat with my housemates the other day, and I was saying, like, our house has a problem with me particularly. I know that I have a problem, and I think a lot of other people do, with at what point does a vent and a need to talk about something become a bitching session. And I think for me, I came to the conclusion that it is so healthy to vent and it is so necessary, but I think it depends who you're venting to. The end goal of the vent, like, is the end goal to receive advice, or is it just to get it out? And also to know when you're moving away from that one topic of, oh, here's what's just happened, and then you just start like slating someone's character. And I think for me, like, I've really tried to work on, because sometimes it just happens. You're talking about something with someone and then you're like, oh, do you remember when they did this and this and this? And it just does become a bitching session. And it's like, you don't always mean it to go that way. But I've tried recently to be really mindful of those situations, because I just feel like everyone bitches occasionally. That's normal. I'm not going to sit here and be like, I am so against that. Like, I am so healed and mindful, because it happens. But it's like, you know, they say never drink water in a room where people are gossiping, because it's bad for you. Like, it's not a great thing to do. And I think it's a really, really fine line. And I think being able to find that line is a really, really good first step in terms of communication with other people. Thing that I've learned a lot recently and worked really, really hard on, and it's really benefited me actually, is just being really uncomfortably honest with people if they upset me. And don't get me wrong, it backfires at points, but I've always found, I've probably been doing this for maybe like six months or so, and I've found that doing this now people know this of me. So like, I'll give you some examples. So say someone says something or does something that I feel some kind of way about. Ordinarily, before, I wouldn't have said anything because I'd be like, oh, it's not that deep, whatever, they probably didn't mean it, make an excuse, move on. But then the next time they do something along those lines, I think, oh, you did this before, and then you did this before. And it starts to build up into resentment. And I noticed that this was happening in quite a few of, specifically my close friendships. And it's almost like the more you start seeing something in someone, your brain actively looks for those behaviours to like validate its point. And then you just start to resent someone. And I noticed that this was happening. And don't get me wrong, some people are just shitty. Like, some people are just not good people. But I almost found that for myself, I was looking for things to validate my point that this person is a certain type of way. And I don't know if there was like a specific point that made me think, do you know what, I can't be asked to do this anymore. But I just started telling people when they'd upset me. And at the start, or I just started being real with someone. Like, if I didn't agree with them, I'd be like, I don't agree with that. And there was a situation maybe like this time last year, or maybe like 8 months ago or so, where I'd said to someone, I was on holiday and I said to someone, I don't agree with how you've handled this situation. It was to do with someone else, nothing to do with me. But I don't think it's very fair. And being your friend, I want to be real with you that I wouldn't appreciate it if you'd done that to me, and I don't think you'd appreciate it if I did that to you. And it caused a bit of awkwardness, a bit of tension. We didn't speak for a few days. And then after that, came back and she was like, I really appreciate that you were the only person that was honest with me and didn't just tell me what I wanted to hear. And after that, I felt such a huge personal win in the sense of being able to have that open dialogue and say, here's how I feel. It doesn't mean I think any less of you, but I'm being honest, and that's okay. And I think Lewis, my boyfriend, and one of my good friends, Joe, have taught me this a lot. Specifically in those two relationships in my life, they've both taught me a lot about open communication. And they'll both say to me, me and Joe, we used to argue all the time about the pettiest of shit. And there was a point in our relationship where we were like, let's just be honest with each other. And the same with Lewis. He's always, since I've known him, he's been super open, and if he disagrees with me, he'll let me know, and it's not like a personal dig. But I really value that about those two relationships specifically, is that I'll get a message every so often being like, hey, I didn't appreciate the way you said this or did this or how this made me feel. No biggie, but maybe in future don't do that again. And it just makes things so much easier. And I've noticed as well, since I've started doing this, in any instance where you change your behaviour, there will be a pushback period where people aren't used to it and kind of have to adjust. And I've definitely found this within people is that, typically how it goes is I'll send a message and be like, hey, don't worry, no stress, but this kind of made me feel this way. I try and use I statements because I feel like I don't want to accuse, because I know that it's never usually about them, it's about me. I'll be like, this made me feel this way. Maybe in future, could we do it this way? Or please don't do that again. And I found that quite often, which is really funny. It's not funny, but I'll be like, it's no biggie. It's not a big deal, no stress. And a few of my friends have said to me, afterwards when I've spoken to them about it, they've been like, I thought that meant it's a huge deal. And I'm like, why would I say it's no big deal if it was a huge deal? And they were like, I guess I'm just used to people being really passive aggressive and being really it's not deep, but the people in their lives mean it's really deep. And I think that's one thing that I think maybe for me it's a neurodiverse thing. I know a lot of people that have ADHD or autism are very, very blunt and blatant about what they mean. They don't beat around the bush. And that is not how a lot of neurotypicals work. A lot of neurotypicals say one thing, police are back. Sorry. They say one thing, but they mean another. They kind of expect you to understand these encrypted messages. It's very, very confusing. And I don't appreciate it because it makes honesty hard, because I think now people understand that is the way I am, and I think it's working in my favour now. But there was definitely this grace period where people would be like, it seemed patronising, or you seemed this, or you seemed that, and I'm like, I understand that, but if I'm saying to you, hey, please don't do this again, case closed, it's not a big deal, it's fine, we're still best friends, I still love you. I think that's quite confusing for some people to understand, because I think a lot of people see conflict. Like, I was having a chat with one of my housemates the other day, and she was like, I really struggle with communication if I'm upset about something, it not turning into a conflict. And I was trying to say to her, you can say that how you feel about something and say that you're upset and angry about something and make it a discussion. And she was like, but it is a confrontation. I'm confronting you about how you have made me feel. And I was like, I understand where you're coming from. I get it. But try and, in your head, remove it from being, you've done this to me, to I feel. And I think I statements, I know I sound like such a gentle parent right now, but like, I statements are so important in those sort of conversations, because my therapist was saying to me the other day, she was like, if you're upset with someone about something, never say you've done this or you've done that. But basically, yeah, I just think it's really important to not blame, because quite a lot of the times you don't mean to upset someone, or you don't mean to do something. And when someone comes to you being like, you've done this and you've done that and you've made me feel this way, it's just like attack. And my therapist always says to me, if you poke a bear, it's going to bite you. And like, I feel that way with confrontation, is that if you go in and saying, you've done this and you've done that, and you know, if you attack, the instant brain response is retaliate or protect yourself, defend your ego. And so I found that if you go into something saying, hey, I feel this way, it just typically makes things so much less escalated or less on a level. And I just think it's a much easier way of having those difficult conversations than you've done this to me. So I feel like that's like the biggest lesson I've learned, like biggest learning curve so far, is that trying to as and when, as opposed to letting it build up. So like someone does something, and obviously weigh up your pros and cons. Not every time something annoys you do you need to be like addressing it, maybe journal it or whatever. Like, you know, there are times people do things or say things and I'm like, that's just kind of their personality. I know that they don't mean anything by it, and you can kind of choose whether or not to be offended by something. But I think if it's something that really cuts deep, or you keep thinking about it after a few days, maybe just be like, look, like I've sat on this for a few days, it's made me feel this way. So definitely pick your battles. You don't have to like every 5 minutes be like, I'm upset, help me, because I think that's going to get jarring for people. And I think that's definitely a line I've had to learn to walk, is at what point do we say something, because you don't want to just be like coming across as like a negative Nancy all the time, or people feel like they can't do or say anything around you because they're going to get a message every couple days. So definitely learn to pick your battles. I think journaling there is really crucial, because if you journal about it but you're still worried about it 2 or 3 days later, I think that's when you should have the conversation. That's kind of the approach I've taken, is journal about it, maybe talk to a close friend that has no relation to the person about it in an unbiased way, and then if it's still bothering you, then have the conversation. The next thing I wanted to talk about was what to do if the person, this kind of goes back to the Georgia Steele thing, what to do if the person that you're trying to talk to about it just cannot take any accountability, has no emotional intelligence, and just throws the toys out like a child anytime that you try and discuss things with them. So I was recently in a situation like this, where sort of like a Love Island-y situation, where I didn't really have an escape from like certain behaviour, and there was no real way around it other than dealing with it head on. And I think that's why I learned a lot during this experience, was because typically my like fight or flight instincts is flight. Like I will just, like, you will literally just never hear from me again. And, you know, funnily enough, I was having a chat with one of my housemates, and she was like, if I get upset with someone, I'll say like, we are done, our friendship is over, but like I'm speaking to them the next day. And I was like, you know, for me that's really confusing, because if I say to someone we're done, like obviously it takes me a lot to get to that point, but you will literally never hear from me again. Like, I'm not the sort of person to like, you know, mid-argument be like, we're done, you're dead to me, like our friendship is over, and not mean it. And I think that's, again, a neurodivergent thing, where like neurodivergent people don't tend to say things they don't mean. But I think I just understand the weight of words in that sense, because I do mean it when I say those things. And I think that's just like a really interesting distinction. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to do either one. I mean, I would rather people didn't say those things to me, because I'm going to take it literally. I think I just take everything literally, but if you don't, it probably isn't going to hurt you as much. But that's what I mean when I say it's a me thing. The way you choose to react to things is always a you problem. Not in a harsh way, but it just is. So anyway, I was in this situation that I couldn't really get out of. And there's this person displaying a lot of characteristics that I don't like or appreciate. And it was sort of how do I walk the line between being able to exist in this environment comfortably, but also express that I'm unhappy with the behaviour? Because that's hard. Like, you don't want to just burn your bridges, but you don't want to just be a pushover. And I think that was a real moment of understanding for me. Is like, how do you walk that line? Because it's a very, very narrow one. And my method was pretty much the same as the last approach, and that did not work at all. When gaslighting and manipulation's involved, especially when the person does not have a good level of emotional intelligence or cannot understand where you're coming from or try and see things through your lens, you're not going to win. And I kind of see that with Georgia Steele on Love Island, is that no matter what someone says to her, she cannot, for heaven nor earth, see things through another lens. She could be held at gunpoint and she could still not step out of her own ego for 1 second and go, I could understand how you see things this way, how it looks like I may have lied. And I think that's a really big thing with people that are trying to gaslight you, is that absolutely at no point could they say, I've lied or I've this or I've that, because that for them puts them in a really vulnerable position. And people that are manipulative by nature or sort of narcissistic will never, ever, ever let anyone see any sign of weakness in them, because unless it's to their own benefit, they will never let that out, because that to them is like the ultimate sign of weakness. I'm not an expert on narcissism, nor am I trying to diagnose anyone, by the way. Thought I'd just say that. But it's definitely an interesting observation. And there have been times where I've been in conflict and I'm like, you actually just cannot step out of your own reasoning for 1 second. It is literally like talking to a brick wall. And I think the thing that's upsetting with these people is that they're usually quite switched on in conversational skills, and they're really, really good at manipulating things to their advantage. Or like, hey, this made me feel this way. And they're like, well, you did this. And it's like, is that relevant right now? But they'll make it somehow seem relevant, and it makes you question your own sanity. And I think that's why it's really, really important to have a really strong set of values and beliefs. And literally, I know this sounds really, really like I'm like talking to a child, but I have to do this for myself, so maybe it would help you. Is I have like a list on my phone of behaviors that I will and won't accept, and I'm adding to it all the time, and it just helps for me really, really break down what I look for in friendships, relationships, jobs, all of these things. Because when you've got that list, and it can be serious things, it can be chill things, it can be anything, but just things that you will and won't accept. And then when you see something on that list, it doesn't have to be like, you're a bad person because, I don't know, like some of the things on the list aren't even deep. But you can say, look, my values allow me to do this and don't allow me to do that. I won't do that. I personally won't step outside of my values for someone else. And if someone else is exhibiting that behavior and it directly affects me, I think I have every right to say, this kind of helps me. And like, you know, I think this is another thing about like neurodivergence, is having these lists and being precise and knowing what you want from things really helps with the confusion in situations where you are being manipulated and they're like, well, it wasn't really that bad. And it's like, no, it was bad. Like, you can't downplay it, because I can compare this to the thing on my list and it lines up. It's like, don't lie, or don't be racist in public, or even like things that are so obvious, don't shout at waiters. In relation to the situation at hand, it's like, you are going against my list. You don't have to make a list. It just helps me in my head be organised. And I think that's the thing, is if someone's trying to manipulate you or gaslight you, you have to have that mental list. You don't have to like physically write it down, but you have to know what you will and won't stand for. And when they try and flip it around on you and whatever, you can just be like, yeah, you know what? You have every right to think that. However, that is not true. Like, that might be your truth. And I think a big thing with narcissism is that you have to let them live their truth, because likelihood is they're going to do this again with someone else. Like, you have to let them have their mindset. You have to be okay with being the villain in their story, because that's the only way that you're going to get peace and like find a way out of your own stress, is just let yourself be the villain in their narrative and their mindset. Let them think whatever they want, because the likelihood is people don't trust them anyway. Like, the likelihood is if they say, well, you did this and you did that, and you know in yourself that's not true, so what? Like, what does it matter? And this is really funny, because this situation that I had recently was one of the first times that I felt okay with being the villain, because I was like, do you know what? Your word is so invaluable. Your word stands for absolutely nothing. So it's so fine that you have that perception and you have that ideology, because I don't believe you. And I think like I really, really, really value my friend's word so heavily. I've got certain friends that I would jump off a cliff for them if they asked me to. Genuinely, their word means so much to me that if I think they know better than me in certain situations. And I've got a lot of friends as well where like I'll go to them for different things. So like in my house, I would go to certain people for certain things. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't speak to them about others, or I don't think that they have that knowledge in other fields. But like, certain people in my house are whizzes in some things. And everyone in my house has a specific strength. And I think kind of alongside having this list is have a list of people that you can go to about different things. Like, if you want someone with a really pragmatic view, have someone for that. If you want someone to shoulder to cry on, go to someone about that. Have a list of people for different things. And I'm not trying to say use them or whatever, but just understand that different people will be good for different things. But also have that mental list of, would I trust your advice? And if it's no, maybe don't go to them for those things. Or if you have an argument, maybe don't worry so much about what they have to say, because you wouldn't take their advice. So why are you worried about their narrative? And I think that was a really freeing realization for me. And I urge you to like make this understanding for yourself, because even my therapist, like, I used to be so worried that I was like a horrible person. And post this experience, I was like, well, at least I don't behave like that. And she was like, it's a really freeing experience being around someone that is badly behaved and so okay with behaving like that, because it puts you in that realization of, I do have good morals and good values. And I think it's a really, really nice experience to have. As much as it's obviously difficult in the time, it does teach you a lot. And I think just think about all those times that someone has manipulated you or not been very nice to you or whatever, and you can just say, at least I wasn't the one behaving like that. They may think I'm the villain, they may villainize me, whatever, but why would I listen to them? And that's fine. My brain switched off now, and I also need to go inside because I have a uni soon. But thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. And have a good day. Love you. Bye.